Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Biotech Project. As you know, we're available on all the platforms, whether you're listening to us on Spotify or watching us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google, whatever it is. Make sure you subscribe and take a listen and catch up if you've missed any of the episodes. Also, really important, visit our website at thebiotechproject.com where you can read about our past guests and today's guests. So speaking about today's guest, John, why don't you let us know who's going to be joining us today?
Awesome. Thanks, Scott. Today, everybody, we're really happy to have with us Mary Jean Fanelli. Mary Jean is a consummate medical affairs professional I've had the pleasure of working with many times over the years, and really looking forward to hear her personal biotech project today.
Yeah, I can't wait. Let's get through the intro.
You want to break into and navigate your career in the pharma and biotech industry. We know how to teach you. This is the Biotech Project. From sales to medical affairs and everything in between, we're talking about it. No matter how you got here, from here to your next role is up to you, and we're here to help. You'll hear from guests in every role, from CEO to sales, recruiters to hiring managers. The Biotech Project. Here are your hosts, Scott Resnick and Dr. John Walsh.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Another great episode of the Biotech Project today with Mary Jean Fanelli. So, Mary Jean, maybe you can kick us off a little bit and give us some of your background professionally about what your education and career has been like, and tell us a little bit about what you're up to.
Thanks, John. Happy to be here. So I like to say that I am a storyteller of data. I am as John said, I'm a medical affairs professional. I've been in the industry for about 15 years. Currently, I work at a medium-sized biotech company in the Cambridge area, whose platform is interference RNA technology. And I am the global medical lead for one of their products in rare disease. My journey has been a little bit non-traditional because I am a physician. I was a physician for a number of years. I'm actually a pediatrician. And I was drawn to biotech mainly because I wanted to have more of a global impact on patient health. And my first job was in Cambridge in a mid-sized biotech company that worked on multiple sclerosis drugs.
Awesome. And I mean, I know for me as a physician, I ended up in biotech by mistake, to be honest, right? I never, when I graduated, I expected I would practice medicine and do that forever and ever. And through a whole series of events, ended up making my way over to the industry. So how did that happen for you? How did the crossover from clinical medicine, especially in pediatrics, make its way over to things like MS and RNA technology?
Great question. So I see my career as being really my second career. My first career was really in healthcare delivery. Early on in my career, I got an MBA in healthcare management. And that was during actually my medical training. And what the model that I had seen, the physicians that had that type of background, was to work at hospitals or HMOs or for a consulting company. And so my first role was actually at Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts, where I worked in a staff model HMO. And I did projects within that delivery system. Having done that for a number of years and having worked on really running up a large multi-specialty group, I wanted to go more into the hospital-based side of delivery. So I worked for a large academic teaching hospital in the Boston area where I was an attending. I was basically a teacher. And I had an academic faculty position. And as part of your career growth, you have to take on different types of projects. And the projects that were offered to me were very interesting. It was running a transport team at this Boston-based hospital. I really wanted to actually do something very, very different. It was sort of It was really a career exploration for me, as you think about sort of like staying in an academic institution versus going into private practice or, trying something else. And so I went on a journey of talking to people with backgrounds similar to mine and seeing like what I thought would fit. I knew I wanted to do something related to patients. I didn't want to work for a large company. I knew I wanted to do something global. And I wanted to do something at the time that was related either to maternal child health or pediatrics. So my first choice company was a biotech company in rare diseases in Cambridge. And I tried very hard to get a job there in medical affairs. They said, you don't have any experience. Like, we just don't hire people who don't have experience in medical affairs. And I ended up at another biotech company actually doing drug safety, pharmacovigilance on a multiple sclerosis drug, which was really an ideal way for a clinician with some academic background to enter industry. Because when you're doing pharmacovigilance, you're really looking at all the adverse events in patients. It's very, very clinical. You're writing up analyses, you're doing reports. But this company was unique because it was smaller. They had us actually sitting on the clinical development teams. So through that, I learned about clinical development. And I also had opportunities to run a study out of this pharmacovigilance group, which doesn't usually happen. So I had some study experience. So having done that for a number of years, I really want to get closer to physicians and wanted to do more with patients. And one of the studies I was working on was actually going to be launched. And as part of that launch, the medical affairs group asked me to join and do that launch. So it happened completely organically, my route to medical affairs. Like it just happened. And it was that job was a medical director's dream. You're taking something that was homegrown at a company and then launching it. And it was in the United States. So I spent a lot of time with clinicians in the United States. And yeah, so that's how I got there. It's kind of a convoluted way to get to medical affairs, but yeah, that's how I got there.
I just want to say the reason why you had to take that path is because you didn't know me, right, John? Because I helped.
Not everybody can be so lucky, Scott.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I ever told you, Mary Jean, we've shared this on the podcast. Actually, Scott was a rep in my territory and started working. He started working on some projects with me in industry. And that's hence how I got to meet just about everybody at their company and ultimately ended up joining that company. So it's really interesting. One of the really cool parts, and I don't know what you think, Scott, but as far as from the podcast perspective, everybody manages to get into this industry somehow a little bit differently. I mean, once in a blue moon, you hear somebody who's like, hey, I graduated from school. I knew I wanted to be in pharma, whether it's on the medical side, sales side, corporate side, and they just figure their way in. But I'd say more often than not, most of the people, irrespective of what their background in the industry is, they manage to kind of find it tangentially and work their way into it tangentially. So it's just cool to see how everybody navigates things differently. Yep.
Yeah, and it was interesting, Mary Jean, to hear your story, talking about kind of the different parts of the business and medicine that you've touched and how they've come together for you. So it's really interesting. Interesting to hear that kind of path. So tell us a little bit about what you're doing now. What's your focus now? I know you said rare disease, which I got to tell you, it's amazing. I've been in this industry for almost way too many years. So since 1998, when I first came into the industry, it was during the Blockbuster era. So to hear rare disease, it was like, no, we can't focus on rare disease. We have to focus on something that's going to generate billions of dollars. So the anti-dyslipidemia drugs and hyperdyslipidemia drugs and those things and the pain meds that were coming out, the NSAIDs and different types of COX-2 inhibitors. I mean, that was where I came into industry. And, to see now that we're coming out with drugs that may treat 250 people in the entire country, it's an amazing, transition. So why don't you share a little bit about, what you're doing now and what your focus is?
Yeah, that's a very interesting trajectory, Scott, because I've thought about that myself, having come from multiple sclerosis, which is a pretty, that's a pretty prevalent disease. And I like the idea of rare because I like the idea of making an impact sort of on the genetic space. So right now I'm in global medical affairs, and I'm the global lead for a rare disease drug that treats a disease called porphyria. And the exciting thing about the thing that really excited me about this role was I was part of a build. So my previous boss was building out medical affairs. When she arrived, it was 40 people. When she left, it was 120. And so she called everyone who she knew in industry and said, I'm building medical affairs, come join me and build this. And that was really, it was building, being part of a build, being part of a growth trajectory. A very exciting platform. Interference RNA technology, I think, has tremendous potential in the market. And then the opportunity to work on an inborn error of metabolism, a genetic disease, which relates to my background. That was sort of like the magic sauce for me. And I have to say that this working in global is very, very different than other medical affairs roles. It's completely different. And I have to say, I really like it. The way global works at my company is, in addition to doing all the publications and the strat plans, we work very closely with the countries, almost like consultants, to try and troubleshoot some of the challenges they may be facing in the medical space. And that's just been fantastic. And just seeing how different countries launch drug. We launched a little more than 2 years ago, and now we're done with the launch phase. We're in more of the more mature phase, so we're doing different things. But it's very, very it's very interesting work. I have to say that global has been my favorite part of medical affairs so far.
Yeah, and I mean, when you contrast that to the work when you're working on a product that's strictly in the U.S. or you're working with a U.S. medical affairs team, the activities tend to be quite different in some way. Obviously, global roles tend to be a bit more strategic in that you're looking to set the global strategy, and then all of the regions and affiliates, et cetera, follow in with that. What do you see as the major differences, and what are the pros and cons people should be thinking about when they have the option between a global role or a U.S. role? Some people I know absolutely positively love being in a U.S. role because it's familiar to them. They like the operational component of it. Other people really embrace the global side. So what do you see as the both sides of the coin?
Well, I personally think that you do better having a country level role like US, Germany, whatever, as a medical lead or medical director, because you can then relate to what happens when you're in global. Because global is very strategic. We do all the publications, we do all the med info, we do studies, but really you have to provide value to the regions and to the countries. And you can get very much into a mindset where you're only thinking about the bigger picture and you don't keep in mind what actually the countries and the regions need. So the big difference that I see is when you're being in the US, you're completely focused on the US needs and very, very, very tactical. Like what needs to get done, what KOLs need to be, sort of like worked with, roundtables, ad boards. Whereas you're in global, you're looking at everybody's issues and seeing how can global really help those countries go up to the next level, in addition to the strategic part. The other interesting thing about this global role is we have because it was an R&D company, they've newly commercialized products, have a lot of contact with R&D. So we have a lot of input into lifecycle management, a lot of input into study design. And we actually we did a registry, we did an expanded access program in global. So I think you tend to have a more diverse, book of work that you do as opposed to being in a country. But I think that country experience is super, super important for every medical director in medical affairs. Like, I just think you need to have that.
What are some of the biggest challenges, when you're dealing with multiple countries. They have different, even from Canada to the U.S., the regulatory system is different. The payer system is different, which of course is going to have an effect on how you develop things, and from country to country, and then and even more importantly now with what's going on in Europe. I mean, what are the biggest challenges, and how do you take that on every day?
So I think one of the biggest challenges is open communication. And because I think that when you're in a country and you're very attuned to what your country needs are, you don't want to have somebody from global saying, no, you can't do that. That's going to be a problem in France if you do that in Germany. So I think that having really open communication and ongoing dialogue. The second reason why that's important is because global is off doing strategy. We're at the home office. We know what sort of the concerns are from the commercial team. We know what corporate wants, and the countries can be removed from that. And if you aren't constantly communicating and keeping them in the loop, you can come out with something that makes absolutely no sense to them. So, at the stage that this company is at right now, we're under tremendous revenue pressure. And we know that in the corporate office, that may not be as apparent to the countries. So you have to be able to communicate those types of priorities in a way that makes sense to the country. So.
Yeah, one of the things that I think is really cool about our industry is it provides you with a lot of different opportunities depending upon what company you're with, right? You can bounce into a whole bunch of different roles. And I know for a while in your career, you had the opportunity to leave medical for a short period of time and work on program management and then head back to medical in way down the road. So maybe talk a little bit about that journey, what it's like to zigzag and take different opportunities as they come.
Well, I think, John, you hit the nail on the head, and it's very company specific though, how you can zigzag. You and I were both at a company that we were able to zigzag really to go into many, many different areas. And so I had a role at this company in pharmacovigilance, went to medical affairs, and then I wanted to gain more operational experience and also do more work in early development to learn more about early development. So my third role at that first company I was at was I did program management for 2 drugs in the lupus space, and it was early program management. Oops, sorry, and
love that song.
Me too. It was early program management. So I was able to take one program from phase 1 to 2. And that was an incredibly valuable experience when you think about drug development and not having had any drug development. And the second program, I had to close a legacy program at that company. And that was beyond anything I had ever done before in terms of difficulty, because it was a homegrown program that had to be closed. And dealing with the emotions of the people who were involved with that was very challenging. And closing a program was just never fun. But I think it provided a lot of value in terms of working across an organization where you're not a medical director, where you really have to use different skills. And I thought it was a very valuable experience.
It's funny. I used to have a manager in a prior role, and he used to say, the way I look at drug development, the way I look at what we do here is succeed or fail fast, right? So if you're not going to succeed, recognize it as early as you possibly can and be able to kind of cut your losses and move on. But to your point, unfortunately, sometimes these programs are difficult, right? I mean, what were some of the challenges you had in having to kind of wind that down and transition to something else?
Yes. Well, this had been actually a legacy program for a very long number of years at this company. There was one senior scientist where it was her baby, and it was thought to be a novel treatment for lupus. And the trial that had been going on for years and was not ever going to show any positive output. But there was a whole team that was really, really supporting that. And the hardest thing was to be able to tell a team of scientists who had worked on, and it was a homegrown molecule, so it was grown in-house, by this team. And, this particular company, people stayed for 25 years at this company. And the hardest thing was to be able to say your baby isn't going to go forward. Even though they knew intellectually, it had been just a very, very special program to all of them. And I think that was the biggest take-home lesson, John, which is that you have to make these decisions sooner, and you have to be very rigorous about your thought processes when you do that.
Yeah, and you're right. It's something really hard for people when especially if you've been there from the inception, watching it grow, to be able to have to walk away from it. I find the other thing that's difficult about why programs don't move forward and why it can be a tough pill to swallow is that a lot of times those decisions are made for a whole collection of reasons, right? It could be, unfortunately, the drug did not perform the way we hoped or expected it to. And we know that's a risk of drug development, right? Not every drug succeeds. And in fact, most of them don't. So we know there's a probability of success, and it's not always on our side, right? So there's that. But then sometimes there are things like business decisions where a company decides to take big interest in one particular therapeutic area over another, or the revenue potential somewhere is so important that they need the funds from one program to help to keep the other program afloat. And I personally have struggled because a lot of times, especially from the science side, you see the potential benefit to patients, right? You see what that compound could do. But it's always so hard, especially when you're in an individual role, to step back for that minute and say, okay, what's best overall for the company? Because we're also going to help patients with the other compound that we're going to invest money in or move forward on. But it's hard. It's hard when you're in those shoes.
And I think that the interesting thing about that is that the company that I'm at now, which is a platform company, the company is not built around a therapeutic area. It's not like an MS company or like hypertension or oncology. It's built around a platform. And so making those types of decisions, which we're faced with now, we have a pipeline. We have some things in NASH. We have some things in gout. We have some things in hypertension. We have something in IgA nephropathy. And the challenge for the company now is how do you prioritize those different assets, and what direction is the company going to go in, which is one of the things that's very interesting about my role, because in medical affairs, you are really involved, even though we tend to work with post-marketed products. In a smaller company, you get more involved in those decisions. You get pulled in to look at something like a product in IgA nephropathy to say, what do you think, the potential is here in conjunction with commercial. But those are very, very difficult decisions to make.
And I would imagine, as somebody who practiced as a physician, where it was very focused on, one thing, and that was absolutely focused on patient care. And then you're in a position where you have to balance the potential impact on patients with the potential impact on business. The toughest part, I think, of our industry is that it still is a business, and people are in it to make money and help fund, whether it's a privately held organization to have profits, or if it's a public company to, be responsible to the shareholders and whatnot. And, it's easy if you're on one side of it to stay focused. But when you're in a position like you are and you have the background that you have, it must be very difficult to look at something and have to make a decision based on things that you've been trained and have, taken an oath, if you will, right? That, is your focus. Is that something that's a little bit easier when you're in the rare disease area, because maybe you don't have an organization that's so focused on a big, broad population that they're trying to reach with, with that perspective, versus a rare disease where it's already known that it's going to be a small pocket that you can reach into?
Well, Scott, that's interesting that you say that, because two things come to mind. One is when I've been asked to look at these sort of the program development, I think of it as a physician, but I really put on more of my MBA hat in terms of looking at what the potential market is, and then de-risking the product. And so that part for me is that part, looking at individual programs like that's much more the analytical side. The bigger question actually for the company that I'm in now is, what type of company is this company going to be? So we have rare disease products, but we have two rare disease products. One that has a nephrology indication in mind, which is in porphyria. And then we have another product that is in peripheral neuropathy that also has a cardiac component. And where we are right now is we also have a drug that treats hypertension. And are we going to, we actually have two. One was sold to a larger big pharma company, and we're developing a second. What are we going to evolve to as a company? Are we going to become a company of prevalent diseases? Or are we going to become a company that focuses on more rare diseases? Because we probably can't do both, because we're so small and the focus is so different. And
yeah, I mean, it's two distinct things that are essentially pulling against each other.
For resources, for how you approach even the development of the drugs. So, and as a physician, I can see the benefit of both. I think that, could we use a better drug for hypertension? Probably. I think that would be more in service of a larger group. At the same time, I think this trend towards rare diseases has been an incredibly great thing for patients. I mean, having been a pediatrician, I would have never thought that we would have a treatment for cystic fibrosis in a million years. I grew up in the era when you made a diagnosis of a cystic fibrosis patient by a baby that had failure to thrive. They would be they would look awful. They'd come in really sick. And with just the advent of genetic screening, newborn screening, when I was leaving, seeing patients, babies, because they were diagnosed at birth, could be put on enzymes, and they were like big, fat, chunky babies, to where we are now, where there's actually treatments for cystic fibrosis, which is amazing. So I can see it both ways. I think that, even though cystic fibrosis technically isn't rare, it's not a prevalent disease either, like hypertension.
Right. And the thing that's cool about CF too is obviously some of the compounds that launched just recently, the Vertex compounds in particular, right? Big game changers that changed the industry. But the best part about CF is the story doesn't just stop there, right? People are building on that technology, and they're looking into other technologies now. So the CF space is expanding. A former colleague of ours, Mary Jean from a prior company, is CEO of a company that's pioneering new work in CF. So that's the thing that's awesome is in our field, things that seem insurmountable, when someone's able just to flip that switch and gain some understanding and get some traction in that place, it just works to build and build and build. Some of the consulting work I'm working on right now involves a product that's used as an adjunct with surgery. And it was really interesting. I took a few minutes to kind of research the history of these surgical procedures. And the surgical procedures dated back to the mid to end of 90s. And there was an article that was written and published about all of the individuals that were involved with helping to advance the surgery. And what was this very kind of rudimentary, crude procedure, if you will, has now turned into something that is quick and easy. The morbidity is very low, and patients do super well. And then with adjunctive medicine along with it, it just helps them improve. So it's just fascinating to watch when you've been in this industry long enough to see where the advances go over time. And that's one of the things that I think is cool for a physician in industry as opposed to on the outside. I wasn't always watching the latest cutting edge of a drug that'll be out in 5 or 6 years because, frankly, it was interesting, but it didn't matter to me because I had a patient sitting in front of me right now that I had to prescribe something for today. So I really had to know current therapy and maybe have an eye of what's going on in the next short term, right? But seeing where the ball is going over time, really, really cool.
I think that's one of the things that's so exciting about being in biotech is that you can see these trajectories and being a part of it, even in multiple sclerosis. Like the drug that I worked on was an infusible that had a terrible safety profile that I'm proud to say the company I worked for figured out a risk mitigation for that. And that was what I got to launch. I'm very proud of that work. And then John worked on a drug at that very same company that was an oral therapy that really changed, patients' lives. And I think that being part of that is impacting patients on a much larger scale. And that was sort of what I was looking for, making that transition from seeing patients one-on-one to seeing seeing benefits to people on a more population-based scale.
Very true.
And I think there's this transition that's happening now. So as we find treatments for rare diseases, and as we're able to fund small molecules and targeted therapies, and gene therapies in particular, if we can figure out get past the difficulty in getting gene therapies approved by the FDA, there's just so much CAR-Ts. I mean, there's all this that essentially what must be happening, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, is something that was seen as a staged disease where, this is the stage they're in and you treat it. People are now finding ways to take things and turn them into chronic diseases, even things like, different cancers. You look at the blood cancers from where they were just a few years ago to today, some solid tumor cancers and different diseases, rheumatology, all these different pulmonary.
I mean, look at HIV, right? I mean, years ago, HIV was a guaranteed death sentence, unfortunately, for most people. And now it's a drug that, it's a disease where if you take your medicine on a regular basis, you can live a long life. I mean, it's incredible, right?
It's remarkable. It's really remarkable.
So when you're in a position like yours, and you're trying to decide, even let's look past today, even, what comes next. Where do you want to go? What do you want to see developed? I mean, it's got to be difficult to figure that out because there are so many different, aspects. How do you start to think about, okay, here's where I am today, but where do I want to be tomorrow?
In terms of a company, Scott, or in terms of what I want to do next?
For someone like you in a position you're in where, you especially with development, right? It's about what you've got today, but really development's about tomorrow. So just in general, how do you position yourself? Like what comes next and how do you think about that?
That's a great question, Scott. I've been thinking about that myself a great deal. So I think that, and John, I don't know if you feel this way, but having been like in different settings, like having been in the healthcare delivery setting and now more on a company setting and having gotten to a certain level, I feel like it's kind of my time to mentor the next generation and also to impact the culture of the company where I work. So I think that as like this, all the science and the technical stuff is really great. But if you want to move organizations forward, it's the people who move organizations forward. So really it's about leading teams and then what you can teach and mentor people on your team to become. That's one part of what I see for the future. I think that you sort of get to a point in your career where, I like to say I'm a teacher, but I don't know if that's really what it is. Like I feel like it's much more of being a storyteller and then teaching a new generation how to do that, but also how to be leaders. Because I think in the pharmaceutical industry, there's a certain type of leader, but I think the companies are changing and I think the workforce is changing. And I kind of feel like it's my generation's job now to go to that next level. That's one. So I sort of see myself leading a company or a team or a division at some point in the future. I'm not sure what that industry would be. I'm pretty excited about some of the digital healthcare delivery companies that are coming. I'm super excited about the work that's being done in hearing, both with gene therapy and cell progenitor cells. I think that there's a couple of very exciting companies that are doing that work in the Boston area, actually in California as well. And then, are there other options for healthcare delivery that we're going to see more digital? more of on the tech side. That would also be interesting. But I'm sort of looking at all that now.
That's an interesting, interesting concept, because having come from pediatrics like you have, I have 3 kids at home, and I just saw an ad for I guess it's an adjunct to your normal healthcare, where they send you a kit. It's a thermometer, an ear scope, and some things, and they're all connected electronically to a platform. And then the healthcare provider, in an acute scenario where you can't get to your pediatrician and maybe you don't want to go to an urgent care with them, can provide urgent care, and you assist. And they get to see results live from these different tools, and they package it in a way that's more affordable than traditional medicine even.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that one. I am really familiar with some of the behavioral modification technology used for things like autism that are done through like sort of digital platforms. And I don't know where all that's going to lead, but I think it's super interesting. And I do think it will help families and it will help patients, because we both know it's not getting any easier to get access to healthcare. So anything that sort of helps people be able to make more informed health choices, I think is good. I think it's really good.
Yeah,
no, that's so true. So true. So as we come up to our last few minutes on the episode, I'd love to just hear from you, Mary Jean, about if you were going to give advice to someone who is interested in getting into medical affairs, what do you tell them? And where do you see this field evolving so that they can start looking in the future and develop the skills that they need now so they're ready for that role up ahead?
That's a good question, because John, as you said, there is no single path that gets you to medical affairs. I have heard from people who have been trying to go into medical affairs that it's still the same, that companies want people who have experience. So what I would say is, if you have some like a healthcare background, there are the traditional ways you enter industry, in clinical development, in pharmacovigilance, and even in something like business development. Those are the traditional ways. I think the best way to enter, if you have a healthcare background, is actually through something like clinical development or pharmacovigilance, something where you can get familiar with how you analyze data and study data. And I think the other thing is presenting. I think that to really be a big part of medical affairs is communication in many forms. It's writing, it's reviewing publications, it's presenting data, it's actually presenting to your colleagues, when you're trying to present studies and expanded access programs. So those types of experience make you, gives you that good grounding. For people who are at different levels, say like PharmDs and things like that, I really think the traditional taking an MSL role is the way to enter. I think that that's a good career trajectory. And I also think the industry is such that you can move from those roles into internal roles much more easily than you could ever in the past. So that would be my advice about entering. Where do I see medical affairs going? I think medical affairs is really, we used to be thought of just as the people who presented data to physicians and presented at congresses and things like that. I think medical affairs is truly becoming that third pillar between clinical development and commercial. And I think that there's also a tremendous ability to be creative in medical affairs, and that's only going to increase. So when I think about like digital, there's so many more creative things that medical affairs can do that commercial and clinical development can't touch. And I think that that's going to grow exponentially. I think that we'll do much, much, much more stuff with big data sets and those types of things. So more analytics. And I also think that we'll run more studies. I just think that medical affairs is just going to become even a bigger presence within organizations. And I'm really biased. I think medical affairs is the most fun and enjoyable part of industry to work in, but I'm completely biased. So
I can imagine. Yeah.
Yeah.
So one last question that I have. So I'm the commercial guy on the team here, and John's, of course, the medical guy on the team here. So what are the What are the things that you see changing between the interactions of medical affairs and commercial as our world is evolving? Is there one thing that you can say you've noticed and make us aware of that? That would be really interesting.
So I think medical affairs, from a field perspective, is going to be more prominent than commercial in the future. I think that commercial, Scott, I'm sorry to say this, I think that commercial is valuable in the field. I think with the increasing demands on physicians' times, they want someone to come in and have an in-depth scientific discussion. They want a scientific partner. They want a thought partner. And really that's where your field MSLs and medical directors come in. And so I see commercial as having more of a role in working with larger healthcare systems, with working more on payer strategy, those types of things. And in rare disease, a commercial rep can't get into the kind of scientific depth that a doctor needs when they're asking questions about rare diseases because they're rare and the doctors don't even know. And so I see MSLs and the field medical directors taking a huge, huge role and only getting bigger. So I'm sorry, Scott.
Well, so let me ask a follow-up to that. Do you think that because there's this kind of evolution where you're going to need your medical affairs team to get into those deep conversations, but at the same time, you still need to drive, let's face it, the business side of things, that there might be a melding where maybe, some of these incoming medical affairs folks come from a commercial background that are able to adapt to and handle the science? Or do you think you're still going to need that advanced science degree in order to, manage to be in the world of medical affairs?
It's really funny that you say that. We have a couple individuals at the company I work now who have gone from commercial to medical. So I think that is extremely doable. It totally depends on the person. These people, they actually had PhDs and they went into commercial and then made the transition into medical, and they're excellent. But yeah, I think that there is a big possibility for that. I also think you're going to see commercial, even in rare diseases, taking, as opposed to that one-on-one getting into a doctor's office, I think you're going to see commercial doing more, working at setting up centers of excellence and those types of things, working with their medical colleagues very closely. But I think having both an MSL and a sales rep going into doctors' offices all the time, I think I just don't think physicians are going to be able to manage that. And if they have to choose, they're probably going to choose the science is my instinct. But, yeah.
And I think there are some positions that do tend to meld some of that a little bit, like KOL engagers, so key opinion liaisons, those types of roles where, there's those, I guess the lines are a little more blurred, but, I think you're right. Hey, Mary Jean, on behalf of John and myself, thank you so much for joining us today. This was fantastic. It was great hearing about you and what's going on, and very interesting to hear coming from pediatrics into the world. Thank you so much for joining us. I really do appreciate your time. John, any parting words?
No, just about the same. Mary Jean, thanks. It's always a pleasure to have these discussions, and even better when we could share them with others. So thanks for your thoughts, and it was really great to spend the afternoon.
Thank the two of you. Yeah, that was really fun. I had no idea what to expect. This was great. Thank you.
Great.
Awesome.
You've been listening to the Biotech Project. Scott and John have 50 years of combined expertise, with roles that have covered everything from frontline sales to senior vice president of medical affairs. Scott and John are industry veterans, equipping you with knowledge from guests in every role from CEO to sales, recruiters to hiring manager. We hope you've enjoyed the show, and we hope you've gotten some useful and practical information. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, check out the website at www.thebiotechproject.com. And for questions and comments, send an email to hosts@thebiotechproject.com. See you next time.